Okay, so with this video, we're going to be talking about Ayato. We're going to talk about Ayaka and Venti and talking about if these characters are worth summoning or not, and for what types of players should be summoning for them. Then you probably should, because you need that type of character. Jump into it. On the 2.6 live stream, we saw the initial impressions of Ayato, and then we're talking about how good he is when his new normal attack animations, elemental skill, etc. And when we're looking at the elemental skill for Ayato, it has a very wide sweeping animation. You can see for the elemental skill, whenever he's using his auto attacks, the auto attack swings seem really, really large. They seem as large as Raiden Shogun's auto attacks. And because the auto attack animations are so wide sweeping, he becomes an AoE character. And the only other character in Genshin that does have a very big effect like this is going to be Raiden Shogun. Now, the other thing about this character is that if you think about Ayato as a character, he's a character that does elemental skill to then infuse his normal attacks and do hydro damage, and has an elemental burst that does a large amount of damage, but instead of doing it all at one number, it's a damage over time. So he's kind of a mixture of Tartaglia and Ganyu put together as a character, and that is actually extremely valuable. The reason this is such a valuable thing to have is because when we're looking at a lot of different team compositions in Genshin, the thing that is most missing in characters in team compositions that need Hydro characters is Hydro application. And the reason that's so important, and Hydro application is so important, is because of the way Ayato's elemental burst works. You can see that on the field, there's going to be a large amount of elemental burst particles going to be like dropping on many enemies going around, pretty much exactly like Ganyu's ultimate. So because that's going to be the case, and there's going to be a large amount of Hydro application, as long as the elemental burst hits multiple targets inside the elemental burst and not just like individual targets or random locations. Now looking at it, it also is going to boost out your food creation. So that is a definite thing, because Kamisito Art Daily Cooking is a must summon ability. Plus Ayato loves boba. Versus Tartaglia, one of the things I wanted to mention was, is he good versus Tartaglia? And if you're looking at both characters, the big problem with Tartaglia is Tartaglia's off-field Hydro application. Now looking at Ayato, that's not going to be an issue because of Ayato being able to apply Hydro while you're off field, and Tartaglia kind of can't. So that improves the viability of the character and the team compositions that can be used. Now Tartaglia can only be really used in a few different team compositions, what kind of involves Zhangling and Vaporized compositions, and can be used in Taser compositions with Fischl and Beidou. But it seems like Ayato is going to be a character that can be used in more compositions because he has an off-field ability. And if we're talking about characters with off-field abilities, the number one character to talk about in retrospect for this would be Xingqiu. Now, the difference between the two characters, from what I can see from the live stream, is that Ayato is going to be an AoE character for off-field damage, whereas Xingqiu, unfortunately, is a single target character. Now, whenever you're using Xingqiu's Raincutter swords, each one is going to be able to only hit one target, and you cannot hit multiple targets. So since he's a single target damage character, Ayato then gives more relevance to off-field damage in that way. Now, the only other character that has the off-field Hydro application for things that are actually relevant and useful are going to be, where are they at? Mona as well as Kokomi. Now, because Mona and Kokomi do have really good Hydro application, both of these characters are really great characters for the off-field Hydro damage. Mona, of course, the problem with her is that her Hydro application is definitely lower in perspective to Kokomi, and Kokomi has a better radius, has more consistency, and also heals, whereas Mona does have possibilities to heal when using a weapon like the Prototype Amber, and also has access to the Thrilling Tales of the Dragon Slayer to boost damage even further. So both of these characters can have potential higher value than Ayato as off-field supports, but the thing with Ayato is his radius is very, very large, and for character compositions and team compositions that utilize Ayato, Ayaka, or Ganyu, one of the things that's most valuable on those teams is grouping mechanics. But if grouping mechanics are not possible because of characters like Venti not being in the team, or the enemies are not able to be grouped, having a large radius will be very, very effective and very helpful for characters like Ayato. And if they're in like a very big open world area, or there's a large amount of area inside of Spiral Abyss where you need to freeze enemies and you're not able to group them, that would be extremely helpful in content. Because on Ganyu and other characters, I can definitely see that there are certain situations where I want to freeze and I want to do the damage to the targets, but the enemies can't be grouped, so using freeze is kind of problematic. And I end up freezing one enemy on one side, another enemy on another side, or they jump to the opposite side. That's really hard to freeze off, but making so that I have a Ganyu ultimate stacked on top of an Ayato ultimate seems like a really good way to go. The other thing is that Ayato could actually be really good for future team compositions because he is a normal attack boosting character, and that will of course be really, really good for characters like Yoimiya in the future, or other characters that are going to rely on lots of damage coming from just normal attack. So I think that Ayato as a character may have some big viability in that direction, and if you are a whale that's going to go for Constellations, of course there will be some viability for maybe the Constellations in the future based on other team compositions that can be created. So for Ayato teams, I think these are going to be the most common Ayato teams that we're going to see going forward. As far as what you're going to see going, where Tartaglia is the Ayato in this situation, because these are going to be the teams that are going to be probably the most beneficial for Ayato. And the reason these teams will work is because on a Taser team composition, you would get a new character that could be a driver just like Tartaglia can, and actually do a lot of damage while also helping the other types of the damage get reflected through Sucrose or Kazuha or whatnot. It'll also help out with the Vaporized team as well and be really good in that team, and will help with massive Hydro application over a large radius so Zhengli can get more Vaporizes in on multiple targets. And will also be very good for boosting teams like Yoimiya teams in order to get more normal attack damage on certain characters because of his normal attack boost that can be coupled with a Yunjin boost. And finally, will be really good for freeze teams that allow for extra percentage damage to go up on different characters and be good for either whale or free-to-play builds. Now, if you're a player that has both Kokomi and Tartaglia, if you're wondering if you should summon for this character, if you have either of the characters, my thought is no. If you are looking for a DPS character on Hydro and you feel like your Kokomi doesn't have enough damage, or you feel like your Tartaglia doesn't have enough damage, and you don't want to hyper invest in Tartaglia any further, you could think about something for the character, but you're probably just going to be better optimizing your artifacts in a different way versus something for the character. Now, a lot of players do not own Tartaglia or do not own Kokomi, so if you're looking for a Hydro DPS character, Ayato seems like he's going to be that kind of character. Now, the thing that I would want to summon for Tartaglia, what's his name, Ayato way more for is because I want another character like Xingqiu. I want more Hydro off-field damage, and I feel like my Mona as well as Kokomi do not provide enough off-field damage for my character kit. And because Ayato has that potential to become off-field damage, I would really want it for a character like my Yoimiya or other characters in the future so I can actually create more compositions. And I feel like Ayato is going to give the possibility of more compositions to arise versus characters like Kokomi as well as Tartaglia. Now, Kokomi is a character that provides the most team compositions available as far as what you can do with her, because she is a great character for adding a healing component to your team compositions, as well as providing a decent amount of damage. But the reality is that Kokomi's damage, no matter how you look at it, will be worse than both Tartaglia's and Ayato's, but not even so, not going to be the best off-field damage, but maybe better, maybe the same on-field damage. So as far as a character like Xingqiu goes, I would really prefer another one of these types of characters, and that's why I kind of want to summon for Ayato. Now, the last character we want to talk about, of course, is Ayaka. And Ayaka as a character is a easy skip character if you already have Ganyu. If you already have Ganyu, you do not need Ayaka. There is literally no reason to use the character Ayaka at all if you have Ganyu, unless you summon for Ganyu, but then somehow randomly ended up getting a Mistsplitter, and you're like, you know what? I want to get Ayaka because I actually missed her the first time around, and I got the Mistsplitter, and I want to use a 5-star weapon, and I only have a prototype Crescent for my Ganyu, so fuck that, so I'm going to summon for Ayaka. If that's you, that sounds like a good plan. But as far as cryo DPS goes, if you are looking for a big cryo DPS and you already have Shenhe, Ayaka is probably one of the best characters in the game to work with a character like Shenhe, besides Ganyu, depending on the situation. And both Ayaka and Ganyu can utilize Shenhe very effectively. But if you're a player that kind of skipped out on Shenhe and you're wondering if Ayaka is any good, the answer is yes, she's extremely good, but Shenhe makes her a lot better. So if you are looking to make your current cryo teams really strong and you already have a Ganyu, you would not do better with an Ayaka, you would definitely be better off with a Shenhe. If you don't have that and you're looking for a really solid cryo DPS, yes, Ayaka is a great pickup. The only other characters that you can use instead of Ayaka or Ganyu are going to be Rosaria, Diona, as well as Kaya and Changyang. All of those characters aren't the best characters as far as cryo DPS goes. They all have their own flaws, but you know, the only one that you really should play is Rosaria because she's the biggest freaking waifu in the universe, and she's insanely powerful with a nice gap close. Only thing I'm going to talk about otherwise in this video is we're going to talk about Constellations. For both Venti and Ayaka, I do not recommend any Constellations at all. The reason I don't recommend any Constellations on Venti is because Venti's Constellations as a whole are going to be boosting one type of element, and that element is going to be Anemo. C1 is completely useless. The C2 reduces Anemo resistances of enemies, and that's very helpful for your Zhao teams by a little bit by reducing physical as well as Anemo resistance by 24%. And that's only if you keep them airborne. So if you use an elemental skill, you can reduce Anemo resistance by 12%, which is nice, but if you keep them airborne, it's 24%, but that's kind of sus. And then boosting Anemo damage for himself by 25%, which is nice, and then Anemo resistance by C6. So it's extremely expensive to boost your Zhao in this fashion. I don't really recommend it. It's super, super expensive for a very small boost. And then for Ayaka Constellation, she's in this pretty much the same boat. The Constellation 1 is completely useless. If you think it's useful, oh my god, your Copium is legendary. The C2 is interesting and quite decent. It's basically a small damage increase to your ultimate. So it's about a 40% damage increase to your ultimate, which is quite good. But as far as the overall damage increase goes, you're only getting the 40% damage increase if the enemies are large enough to be hit multiple times by your elemental burst, and that's a super big rare thing. And the only other Constellation that's super impactful is the C4, which is really good for lowering defensive enemies for your ultimate, which is a basic 30% damage increase of your ultimate on all 3 of the hits, so it's quite nice. The Constellation 6 is more of a fun, really cool thing to see how hard you can hit and what numbers you can really reach, but I personally do not find it to be super, super helpful unless you have a character like Shenhe to really maximize this. Now, the other thing that's going to happen is going to be the Mistsplitter is going to probably be returning on this manner, as well as the Windbloom, the Venti weapon, which is the Elegy for the End. Elegy for the End as a weapon is a very good weapon on a lot of different characters, and if you wanted to pick that up, it is decent if you end up losing the 50-50 on your Ayaka weapon banner. Mistsplitter, however, is one of those like super universal weapons that gives pretty much everybody on any team, regardless of what you're going to be using on, a total of 12% elemental damage to all elements and a total of 28% elemental damage in total if you don't have any type of elemental infusion on your weapon. If you do have an elemental infusion on your weapon, it's going to be a total of 40%, which is quite nice. So that's a really, really good weapon. In comparison to the Jade Cutter, it's actually a better weapon than the Jade Cutter per se, because the Jade Cutter has a major problem with it, and that it's a crit chance weapon, not a crit damage weapon. And that is a problem because the character that would be most useful on is Ayaka, and Ayaka is, of course, a crit damage character because the Blizzard Sphere set is a cryo set. Now, the great thing, of course, is the Jade Cutter, if it does come back out at some point, which was just on the most recent banner, would probably be good for Ayato. So if you're wondering if the Jade Cutter support Ayato is probably good with all 3 of the weapons, whether it's his own weapon, Mistsplitter, or Jade Cutter. He's probably going to have a little bit more damage increase on his 5-star weapon for his specific weapon, but I don't think it's going to matter that much. So Venti as a character is the first character in 2.6 that's going to land at the same time as Ayato, and Venti is a character that everyone's going to probably skip in general and probably should skip. There are 3 main reasons that Venti is a character that you do not want to summon for this time around. Now, Venti is a really good character to have in your inventory, in your box in general, because he's a character that can actually boost out your speedrun teams by a lot. If you don't know this about Venti, he's the best character in Genshin for speedrunning, because in all of your artifact domain farming and all your other farming, he is a character that can group all the enemies very effectively while also doing a mediocre amount of damage. There's weapon choices for him. Elegy for the End is the best supporting weapon. The best damaging weapon is going to be Moyun's Moon, and the best alternate weapon for both elemental skill and elemental burst is Stringless. That's probably the most common weapon that people are going to have. The free-to-play option of the Windbloom Ode, if you've got during the 1.4 live event, then you could actually use as well. But the most common weapon that a lot of people do use for Venti in general nowadays is probably going to be the Favonius Warbow if you are in need of energy recharge for your teams. The reason that the Favonius Warbow is probably a really good weapon to be using on Venti nowadays is because the team compositions that Venti is centralized around are going to be called Morgana teams. Morgana is a team basically that uses Mona as well as Diona and Ganyu as well as Venti together. Ganyu's alternate, of course, is Ayaka, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. And Those two characters in general for Venti are perfect because of the way Venti's elemental burst works. The reason Venti is a very helpful character for those types of teams is because when you use Venti's elemental burst, you end up getting a total of 15 energy back to whatever element you swirl. On teams like Ayaka teams, that's actually a very helpful thing to have on your team because you're missing a lot of energy recharge because Ayaka's inability to gain a lot of energy for her character kit. So that's why Venti is a very helpful character. However, major two reasons that Venti is a skip this time around and is a very big reason to skip and you want to summon for something else is because first, Ayato is here and you probably should go for Ayato because he's a lot better. And second, this is the big reason, is because there is probably a character coming very, very soon, which is the most awesome character in Genshin, which is Kazuha. Now, the reason you're going to want Kazuha over Venti as a character is because in content for Genshin Impact, Venti is a character that provides energy recharge to teams, and that is quite nice, but is easily accessible through a lot of different things through artifacts. You can actually get a lot of artifact rolls that actually just side roll onto energy recharge and actually get enough energy for a lot of the characters that you want to play. You don't actually have to get a lot of energy recharge rolls, you just need a few. The other thing is you could actually go for a main stat at energy recharge and end up getting an energy recharge sands, which will then improve the energy recharge into a high enough value so that you actually do get enough energy for the team compositions you want to use. So energy recharge as a thing has become less and less valuable for teams that utilize Venti, and damage increases like Kazuha are far more valuable. This can actually be seen even further by using characters like Shenhe. The reason, if you're going to be showing for a character like Venti in the future, one of the characters that's most important to skip Venti for is a character like Shenhe. The reason Shenhe is such a good character with a character like Kazuha is because of the way Shenhe's boost works. Shenhe's boost for her elemental skill is going to boost your damage by a total of, I think it's like 74% at talent 10 for whatever her attack is. And the way this damage is multiplied is against the elemental damage of the character that you are playing currently that is dealing cryo damage. If that character is either Ayaka or Ganyu or any character, this damage will be multiplied times percentage damage. And because it's multiplied times percentage damage, a character like Kazuha in a cryo team is going to boost that even further. So using that with a character like Shenhe is going to make that far more valuable than getting any type of other damage that you can get. And seeing how the other characters attack, or the main character that you're using for damage, their attack percentage is not going to matter in this context for the Shenhe boost. You actually get more damage by using an elemental percentage damage boost than you are for an attack boost on other characters by utilizing Shenhe together with them. So that's why even if you do get an energy recharge stance on your main DPS character or whatever character you're going to be using, it's not going to negatively impact you in such a way that you will not have enough attack and not enough damage on the characters because the elemental percentage damage boost from a character like Kazuha is more valuable than the energy recharge gain from a character like Venti. It's a very difficult way to explain it math-wise, but just take my word for it now. Unless you want to see the math on it, just DM me sometime on Twitch. The other reason that Venti is a skip is because of Spiral Abyss. For a player playing Spiral Abyss, I actually looked up a lot of different floors on Spiral Abyss for the past floors for Spiral. Oh my god, I just hit the wrong button. Past floors for Spiral, and I found out the useful floors for the character Venti and where he's stopped being useful. And I actually found that the last time Venti was supremely useful, which was super helpful to have Venti, was going to be all the way back in floor 12-2 in last May. That was the last time Venti was actually super useful. But the problem is, Kazuha actually came out around this same time. And because Kazuha came out directly after this, that made it so that Kazuha on the same floor for the following Abyss, that had a lot of treasure hoarders and a lot of different enemies, was actually a better character to use because he was actually able to deal damage simultaneously versus just grouping the enemies. Now, on Venti, you can group the enemies and deal some damage, but Kazuha will boost damage of whatever elemental typing and do a significant amount of damage and actually be able to one-shot the entire wave, whereas Venti still needs another character to help him with destroying the wave. So, in general, Venti was a good character, but only really worked on the grouping characters. Whereas a character like Kazuha would actually be very beneficial for the alternate floors and actually has a much higher shield break potential on things where you have multiple enemies like Abyssal Lectors, Abyssal Mages, etc. And was a super helpful character in comparison to Venti. On more recent floors of Abyss, more enemies have become tankier and heavier, and the grouping mechanic of Venti becomes worse and worse. So using a character like Venti starts to drop off. The other issue with a character like Venti is that Venti against an Abyssal Herald will not be able to freeze the enemies and then swirl the cryo consistently to get the energy recharge back for the correct elements, because characters with innate elemental shields, even if they're hydro shields, don't always swirl the element hydro into Venti's swirl to give the energy back to the appropriate element. So he becomes worse and worse as time goes on, and there's more and more enemies that cannot be brute per se. Those kinds of enemies that are becoming more and more relevant in Abyss, because we're starting seeing a lot more specters in Abyss, a lot more enemies that don't have any grouping mechanics possible with them. So I think that Venti as a character may see some relevance in the future, but as a character, I feel like he's not the character that you want to summon for, because Kazuha is probably coming very, very soon, and you would probably be better suited for a character like Kazuha. All right, so this video was long. Yeah, this is a very long video, super long. So I know that you guys are gonna have a lot of questions about this, so I wanted to make a longer video so you guys get the full breadth of what I think about each situation for the characters. And if you had time to watch this part of the video, great. But thanks for watching. Peace.